preach on the sovereignty of God, there is always the proverbial little old lady in the congregation who protests and says, my God is a God of love. As if the love of God trumped all of the rest of his attributes. Love excludes justice. Love prohibits wrath. And it's like we have a theological smorgasbord where we go with our plates and we go there and we help ourselves to a little grace, a little mercy, a whole lot of love, and we leave the justice and wrath and holiness on the table. I always want to say to the dear little lady, your God is a God of love. How many gods are there? Is there a God for you and a God for me and a God for everybody else? No, you can't do that. God is his attributes, and you can't set one attribute against another. So, for example, when we talk about his holiness and say his immutability, we understand from our study of God that God's immutability is a holy immutability. It is an eternal immutability. It is a singular immutability. And likewise, his holiness is an eternal holiness, an immutable holiness, an omnipotent holiness, so that every attribute of God defines every other attribute of God in relation. And so we know at the outset, and this is why I'm taking this time, that we dare not establish a hierarchy of attributes in God and say that one is higher than another. But if we were to do that, and we must not do it, but if we did, and look down at the abyss of heresy, the one attribute that would immediately be exalted to the top would be the holiness of God. But rather than seeing holiness simply as an attribute of God, I think we need to understand it as the sum of the attributes of God, because holiness captures all that he is in every aspect of his being, in every aspect of his character. Now, with that in mind, let's go to the text of Isaiah, which begins with a time frame reference of the call of Isaiah. He tells us simply, it was in the year that King Uzziah died. That means about the middle of the 8th century BC. He doesn't say it was after King Uzziah died, although that idea seems to be suggested through the text. But he could simply mean by this historical reference is that the same year that Uzziah died was the year I was called to be a prophet. One of the great ironies of history is that the same year that King Uzziah died in Israel, or in Judah, the same year that Isaiah received his call to the ministry, who became the greatest messianic prophet of the Old Testament, a little village was established across the Mediterranean in the nation of Italy that was given the name Rome. It's one of the great ironies of history that the same year that God set apart this prophet to talk about the one who would come as the suffering servant to redeem his people, by his providence a village was established that centuries later would reach the summit of conflict between the things of God and the forces of hell. Rome against the gospel. But it was in that year that King Uzziah died that Isaiah had his vision. If I were to give a pop quiz to the students of the Bible and say, who do you think would be listed in the top 5 kings of the Jewish people in their history? Who would you put on that list? Certainly everyone would include David. Certainly Josiah would be on that list. Probably Hezekiah. But on my list would have to be included Uzziah. Because if you look at the history of the kings, particularly the southern kingdom, you will see the one who came closest to David in extending the boundaries of the nation from Dan to Beersheba and establishing one of the mightiest armies in their period, and yet the one most famous for the public work projects that were completed under his administration. And for the longevity of his reign, 52 years. Uzziah became king at age 16. And he reigned for 52 years. And until his latter years, where he exhibited a Shakespearean flaw, a tragic fall, corruption in character. When he became swallowed up in his own pride, he wasn't satisfied with being the monarch. He wanted to be the priest king. And presumptuously, he enters into the holy place and usurps the right of the priests to offer the incense. He says, hey, I'm the king. I'll do that myself.